A lot of things about the occupation of firefighting that impact reproductive health. The toxic environment that firefighters are in, heat exposure, loud noises can impact that, the weight of gear and carrying heavy equipment. So there's a lot of things about the occupation in general that impact just a woman's fertility and her ability to get pregnant.
Welcome back to We Do the Heavy Lifting. I'm your host, Dr. Jenny Yentis, and today we do Women in Fire. We know that we have a lot of firefighters that work in our communities. They may be career firefighters hired by your city. They may be volunteers. Maybe they're wildland firefighters. And when you think of a firefighter, there's an image that you think of, and women in fire is usually not the first thing that you think about. So what are the specific issues, or what are issues that we need to think about when thinking about women's health and the fire service? Our guest today is Dr. Brittany Hollerbach, and I'm really excited to have you here today, so thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So you received your PhD in kinesiology from Kansas State, and currently you're an associate scientist and Deputy Director at the Center for Fire, Rescue, and EMS Health Research at NDRI USA, which is sort of a nonprofit that does research in all these different areas.
Yes, with a very long name, I get it.
Yes, very much so. So you've published several papers on reproductive outcomes in both, we're just going to get right into it, in reproductive outcomes for both male and female firefighters. Can you talk a little bit about what those issues are and what you all have found?
Yeah, absolutely. So the literature on reproductive health in firefighters, there was a little bit of literature that came out in like the late 80s, early 90s. And then after that, there was not a lot until the last 5 years.
Okay.
So our groups like Dr. Jeff Burgess out of the University of Arizona have done wonderful work on reproductive health. Unfortunately, what we found is that women firefighters tend to have higher rates of miscarriage compared to women in the U.S. general adult population.
Okay.
We've also found some higher rates of preterm birth, and that also, so that was, we published in 2018, and then a little bit later we did some more analysis of the data, and we found that volunteers actually have a higher rate of miscarriage compared to career firefighters. And we found that also held true for wildland. So if you're a wildland firefighter, career versus volunteer status, that held true again. Volunteers, higher rates of miscarriage compared to career firefighters. And at first, we re-looked at the data because we thought, this must be wrong. We screwed that up somehow. Let's run that back. Because our perception was that career firefighters are more exposed, have higher rates of exposure due to more consistent working the job more consistently. But then when we got to thinking and talking to our colleagues who do a lot of volunteer firefighter research, we thought, well, they may actually not have the same research and resources that the career fire service has. For example, the career fire service is really focused on cancer prevention right now, and so career fire service departments are trying to have 2 sets of gear for folks. They're very cognizant about washing gear and on-scene decon, and I don't know that those practices have trickled down to the volunteer fire service as a whole. So are we wearing gear that fits, especially for women? Is it being washed on a regular basis? Is it hand-me-down gear? Is it 10-year-old legacy gear? Like what chemicals are in the gear to begin with? So yeah, there's a lot of stuff going on with that. In addition, there's a lot of things about the occupation of firefighting that impact reproductive health. So the toxic environment that firefighters are in, but also like the heat exposure can impact reproductive health. It can impact fertility and hormonal regulation. Loud noises can impact that. The weight of gear and carrying heavy equipment. So there's a lot of things about the occupation in general that impact just a woman's fertility and her ability to get pregnant. Now, these same factors also can impact male factor fertility. There was a study out of Denmark that found that male firefighters had a 46% increased risk of infertility compared to like male civil servants.
Okay. So there's clearly a problem. And we've had other guests on that have talked about the cancer risk in firefighters. We had an episode in 2023. If you want to go back and listen to it with Meredith McQuarrie, Dr. McQuarrie talked about turnout gear fit, but then we also talked about the textiles and washing and how taking care of it. And you have to remember that, gear doesn't, like, you just don't throw that in your home washing machine and away you go. There's certain protocols that have to be followed, and gear in some states has to be retired mandatory at 10 years, and volunteer don't always have access. So I think there's a lot of factors. There's so much more that we could be doing that the public doesn't really know. So you yourself were a firefighter.
Yes.
So when you were a firefighter, what are some problems more specific to females? I know that I jumped into the reproductive health piece because I just find that massively intriguing because, a lot of people think of reproduction, they think about women, but I'm glad that you mentioned it. It does affect males. There's higher rates of infertility there. But what are some of the other factors that you noticed for female firefighters?
Yeah, and it's funny. Over the last few days, we've had this conference, and I've been thinking about how long it's been since I was a firefighter and how much things have changed. So when I was a firefighter, I know that friends of mine, I know this is still true today to a point, that firefighters often don't think about, like, when they're pregnant on the line, they don't think about when I'm going to come off the line. So when I was a firefighter, like, I don't have kids, so I haven't gone through becoming pregnant or wanting to have kids as a firefighter. So that really wasn't in my thoughts. What I saw women struggle with a lot was physical fitness, and training. The CPAT especially is very difficult for women. For our listeners, what is the CPAT? Candidate Physical Ability Test. So the CPAT is a recruit or candidate test, a physical test that firefighters have to pass in order to either be certified as a firefighter or get on a fire department. Okay. So most fire departments require some type of physical agility test. Yeah. Okay. And so women, you notice that the physical fitness in trying to complete that test. Yeah. And I think in the public perception, I'm going to send out a generality there. I think sometimes the public perceives that those standards were lowered for women. Some will feel that way. Some will feel like maybe they shouldn't be adjusted for women. I know that you have your own opinions, yeah. But can you sort of talk about maybe where we are in the status or where the field is at with that? Have we been adjusting them? Are we not adjusting them? Are we needing to and we haven't done it yet? What is the status there? Yeah, absolutely. So we do work with fire departments on developing legally defensible FPATs, or firefighter physical agility tests. And I think it's really important to remember that it should be job relevant. That's the number one thing. Man, woman, you have to be able to do the job as a firefighter. I think we can all agree on the mission critical nature of the job. Yeah. I think where we get hung up is the tasks that we're doing. Why are we having firefighters do X, Y, and Z task that's a part of a firefighter physical ability test? And how much time and training are they getting before they take said exam? So the CPAT, for example, has a high failure rate for women, but that's usually because they're not given ample practice time, especially with the equipment. So equipment can be there's that testing bias, right? The more times you have exposure to equipment, the better you do with it. Yeah. So I think a lot of that, and the CPAT, for example, recommends that folks have ample access to the equipment to practice prior to taking the actual exam. So I think a lot of that is, it's not about lowering standards. We don't necessarily need a slower time for women or to lower standards, but it's making them equitable for everyone, right? And providing enough practice and preparation so that we know what the tasks are. For example, the CPAT requires that you wear a 50-pound weighted vest, and for the first event, you wear 25 pounds on your shoulders as well to simulate a high-rise pack or hose bundle on the stair carry. Yeah. So that, for a woman or small individual, is a lot bigger proportion of their body weight than a large individual, right? Yeah. So in general, men kind of have an upper hand because they tend to have a larger frame and can carry that weight better. But it's not to say that women can't do it. It's just they need to train to do that specific task. So I really feel like that's firefighting in general. If we all train for this job, we can all do the job, but you just have to know kind of what to train for. Exactly. And I think I really appreciate
you brought up the point about practice. I teach a class on how to basically teach motor learning. And those are motor skills they're learning. You know, we think about as adults, you probably don't think about, you know, when you learned how to walk or when you learned how to stand or jog or gallop or whatever it may be. But those were motor skills. And as an adult, you're learning a new skill. And it takes time for the nervous system to figure out what nerves am I going to use, what motor units am I activate, what muscles am I going to use, how fast do I have to move this joint. And it's just like if you've never swung a golf club, it's the same. You're learning a motor skill. You need that practice in order for the body to even figure out what works and what doesn't work to be efficient physiologically.
Even for me, the first time walking in fire boots I felt like I was learning to walk. Like
Interesting.
They were very heavy. And first of all, gear has gotten infinitely better from when I was a firefighter. And we were in an academy, so we had like hand-me-down gear and stuff. But yeah, like they're steel-toed, heavy rubber boots. And I remember putting them on and feeling incredibly awkward. And my center of balance was off. And so you're absolutely right. Like all of the things that you're doing are different. And it depends on the size of the individual and what strengths you have coming in. And you know, have you been lifting weights? And did you know, I think that's part of it too, is did you know, like I was athletic, I played sports in high school, but like I didn't know how to train for the job of a firefighter coming in. Yeah. And once I learned how to do that, like go to the gym and carry 25-pound dumbbells in my hands while I'm walking on the step mill, like, okay, that's a different kind of training than I was doing before. Yeah. Now I'm more prepared to be able to do these job-specific tasks. Okay, now I can do it. So it's not necessarily about lowering standards. It's really about equitably sharing, here's the tips and tricks and how to do these things and allowing folks to learn appropriately.
Absolutely. I was going to ask you about what young women should understand if they're considering being a firefighter. And it really sounds like at least one of those things is understanding what the job is about. I think the public doesn't really understand what firefighting is. I've said this on the podcast before. My dad was a firefighter, and last year my parents were in town, and we toured the fire field, which you saw. We have an incredible fire field here at Texas A&M University.
It is incredible.
It's wonderful, and there were some live burns. There's firefighters putting out, and my dad has been retired since 2002, and my mom goes, I think I finally understand what your dad did every day. I mean, my dad was a career firefighter since the early 70s, late 60s.
Yeah.
And here she is. He's been retired 20 years. And she's like, I think I finally get it. Yeah. So even the families sometimes don't even understand what the job entails. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think departments can do a better job of who we're recruiting and how we're recruiting. Like the language that we use, the term firefighter versus the term fireman, like, you know, making the possibility of the job accessible to women as well as to men. And, you know, there's so many messages to women. Like, we can talk about there are a lot of impacts of the occupation of firefighting, right? And there's absolutely risks. But I don't want women to think like, oh, it's prohibitive to me wanting to have children. Like, there's so many progressive departments out there that are doing wonderful things to protect women who want to conceive. And, you know, perhaps it's alternative duty assignments, perhaps it's coming off the line if you're struggling with infertility and trying to get pregnant. There's so many resources. And that's the thing, the fire service, firefighting is one of the best jobs in the world. Like firefighters will tell you over and over again, it is the greatest job in the world. There's a sense of camaraderie that I don't know if it exists in other communities, other occupations. But, you know, there's definitely some inherent dangers as well. And I think knowing those, being educated and knowing what it is going into it is really important, but shouldn't stop you from wanting to do the job.
And not only that, I think there is a concerned effort, at least from the research side of things, of how can we make things more safe. Like the textiles we use, is the gear fit correctly? Does the coat need to be longer? I'm not using the right term, but
no, that's
it's all these types of things that you can start to consider of how long should you be exposed, using data, wearables, like is their body temperature, their core body temperature high? All of that can start to be worked in, and so it'll progressively get safer.
Absolutely.
Right? Yeah,
absolutely.
So if you were to solve one problem in firefighter health right now, what would you choose to solve? What would be that problem in firefighter health?
I think the one thing I would change is the culture of the fire service. And I know that's a broad answer, but I think that when we're talking about health and wellness and we're talking about change in the fire service, that's the key, is change. And change is hard for normal humans, for civilian humans. And then for the fire service, we're deep rooted in tradition, and it's part of a badge of honor. And so it's very, very hard to make change. And so I think when we start to attack any health and wellness issue, and there's lots of them, I think we need to start with culture and start with diversifying the fire service and bringing different voices to the table. And as we begin to shift that culture, it will make it easier to attack different health problems.
I've got a side question for you that might just be as loaded. So if you shift that culture, do you destroy that camaraderie of that occupation?
I think you make it stronger.
Okay.
I think there are issues in the fire service. There are health issues. There are discrimination and harassment issues. Why is only 5 to 7% of the fire service women? Like, why are there so low numbers of minorities in the fire service, racial and ethnic minorities, gender minorities? So I think, more than anything, I think it enhances the culture by shifting the culture to include and embrace diversity. Then I think we're also embracing the change that's happening, like not wearing dirty gear, not embracing like, oh, my gear is filthy from this fire and I love it. Right? Like, yes, we love it. It's a badge of honor. Now go clean your gear. Right? Yeah. So I think like a lot of it is like embracing the change, but embracing the change for better, leaving it better than you found it.
I love that. I absolutely love that. And another thing that we thought about that I just want our listeners to think about is we talked about younger generations. Right now, if you go into an elementary school and you ask kids what they want to be when they grow up, when I was a kid, kids wanted to be a marine biologist. They always do. Firefighter, police officer, those types of civil servants, essentially. And now you ask them and they're like, I want to be a YouTuber or a gamer. And parents, I don't have children, but parents, like, Can we do something? Is there a culture shift that we can start making with our children? Can we reinforce that it is a great job, that not everyone needs, I say this being a college professor, not everyone has to go to college. Right. Like if your child really doesn't want to go to college, what are the vocations that are really rewarding that they can do?
Firefighting. No, so I think another loaded question, but I think there's multiple answers. I think one is it's important to share the multifaceted face of the fire service, right? So I think we picture what we see, right? And that's like TV shows and movies, and it's sexy Mr. November from the calendar, and it's the folks on the firefighter TV shows, and they're constantly running into burning buildings and solving these emergencies, and they do. But there's so much more to the fire service. And so I think appealing to a larger audience, perhaps going to fires isn't what makes you excited. Perhaps it's public health and education. Perhaps it's going out in the community and helping folks. Perhaps it's being part of community risk reduction is huge in the fire service. Perhaps that's what you're into. And I think tapping into like understanding that we're really marketing, we're reaching out, the fire service is reaching out to a different type of individual. We used to really play hard on that, adrenaline junkie that wants to fight fires, that wants to go to the emergencies, and we need those people as well. But we also need caring, nurturing individuals. We also need folks who want to do social media for the fire department. And I think that's part of it, is showing the different facets of what the fire department entails. I also think it's the way we go about recruiting, right? So perhaps it is through YouTube videos, through TikTok videos, through Reels and tweets and posts and whatever the things are.
By the time this is posted, it'll be something
those
new.
Will be old, right?
Yeah.
So all of those things, but I think we need to get better at how, and we the fire service, we as researchers, we all need to get better at how we're talking to the younger generation, because I think that we I talked about the fire service being deep-rooted in change. Listen, I don't like change either. So I think we all can get better at how we're talking to one another, how we're talking to the younger generation, how we're thinking about kids and getting them interested, right? And where are we posting videos, and what are they saying, and what types of dolls, toys, virtual reality, right? Like all of these things, the fire service should be playing on that and capitalizing on that rather than shying away from the new tech that exists.
Well, there's so much to do in so many areas, and our time has come to an end. It goes by so quickly. Is there anything you'd like to leave with our listeners, or take-home message that you haven't been able to, just something, last nugget?
I think that it's hard to know where to go for information. So I am constantly sending folks here and sending folks there. And I am so glad that you do this podcast, because I think it is incredibly important to share this information. I would also like to share that we have something called the Science Alliance. You can go to science-alliance.org and find out all kinds of information about current studies that are going on. So I would invite folks to check that out. I think be involved as best you can and reach out and ask questions, because that's the best way for us to connect with one another, whether it's researchers or fire service or occupational health providers, everybody. Like, let's all come together as a community so that we can solve this. Fire service, one voice, right? Everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Hollerbach, for being here. And thank you to our listeners for joining us for another episode. As we always say, if you have comments or additional topics you'd like us to cover, please email us at huffines@tamu.edu. And as always, stay healthy. Thanks so much.
Thank you.